Somewhere in Europe right now, someone just finished dinner, paid the exact number printed on the bill, and walked out the door. No math, no guilt, no awkward pause while everyone at the table quietly calculates 20%. In America, that same walkout would get you chased down the street, or at least a very pointed look from the server watching you leave. That difference isn't really about manners, and it's definitely not about generosity. It's about money nobody's talking about, hiding in plain sight on every menu in the country. Here's the real question. Why do Americans tip almost everywhere for almost everything, while most of the rest of the world quietly thinks the entire system is a little insane? By the end of this, you'll understand something that changes how you'll feel the very next time you're handed a check. And it connects directly to two other American habits most people never question either. How little vacation time we get and why we open the fridge when we're not even hungry. Stay with me, because all three are more connected than they look. Let's start with the surface explanation, the one almost everyone believes without question. Tipping rewards good service. Simple, right? Except it isn't, and here's the proof. Tip amounts barely change based on service quality at all. Research on this has found people tip almost the same percentage whether the server was excellent, average, or genuinely mediocre. So if tipping isn't really about rewarding good service the way everyone assumes, what is it actually doing instead? Here's the twist nobody expects. Tipping culture in America has roots that trace back to a much darker, much more deliberate place than simple generosity ever suggests. After the Civil War, some restaurant and railroad owners realized they could hire newly freed black workers and pay them little or nothing, because customers would cover their wages through tips instead. It let employers avoid paying real wages while still keeping workers on staff, technically employed, technically earning a living, without the business ever having to foot the actual bill. Tipping wasn't originally a reward. It was a loophole, and a fairly cynical one at that. That loophole never fully closed. Today, many states still allow a tipped minimum wage, a lower base wage for servers, on the assumption tips will make up the difference. In some states, that base wage is a few dollars an hour, a number that hasn't meaningfully moved in decades. The rest depends entirely on strangers deciding, table by table, mood by mood, whether someone gets paid enough to live that week. Now, flip that idea upside down, because here's what almost nobody realizes. In countries where tipping isn't expected, workers usually aren't relying on it to survive. Restaurants pay a full living wage, and the menu price already reflects that. The no tipping culture isn't politeness. It's math done differently, up front instead of after the fact. Imagine two versions of the same restaurant. In one, the price on the menu is the actual price. In the other, the real price is hidden, split between the menu and a number you're expected to calculate yourself, under social pressure at the end of the meal. Which one sounds more transparent to you? Take Japan, for example. Tipping there isn't just unnecessary. In many restaurants, it's actively considered rude, almost insulting, as if you're suggesting the staff's normal pay isn't already more than enough on its own. Or take most of Western Europe, where service is legally required to be included in the price you see printed right there on the menu. A visitor from either place walking into an American restaurant for the first time often has the exact same reaction. Confusion, followed by quiet math anxiety, followed by the question every tourist eventually asks a local, wait, how much am I actually supposed to pay? That's the part that makes visitors from other countries genuinely confused. It's not that they think generosity is bad, it's that they can't understand why an entire industry's wages depend on customers doing unpaid accounting at the table. Here's an I never thought about that moment. Tipping actually shifts the responsibility for paying workers fairly away from employers and onto customers. The business gets to advertise a lower price. The employee's real income becomes your problem, not theirs. That's the quiet trap. Once a system like this exists, it becomes incredibly hard to remove, because changing it all at once would mean either raising menu prices sharply or asking employers to suddenly pay full wages, and neither option is popular with the people who'd have to make that decision. So the system just continues. Not because it's efficient, because nobody with the power to fix it has enough incentive to be the one who changes it first. Now, here's where this connects to something bigger, something you've probably never once questioned. If tipping survives because changing it is inconvenient for the people in charge, that's not an isolated case. It's a pattern. The exact same pattern behind why Americans get so little vacation time compared to almost every other developed country on the planet. I'm not explaining that one fully here because it deserves its own deep dive, its own space to breathe. But once you see the tipping pattern clearly, you'll recognize it instantly in that story too, almost immediately. Back to tipping though, imti, because there's one more layer. Tipping doesn't just affect servers' wages, it quietly reshapes how customers and workers treat each other in ways that have almost nothing to do with the actual quality of the meal or the service. Research on restaurant tipping has repeatedly found that factors having nothing to do with service, the color of a tablecloth, being touched briefly on the arm, even something as trivial as the weather outside, can measurably shift tip amounts, sometimes more than the quality of the food itself. Which means the entire system isn't cleanly rewarding good work. The way most people assume it is, it's often rewarding, essentially mood, psychology, and a handful of tiny social cues nobody consciously notices in the moment. Imagine finding out your paycheck depended partly on whether it was sunny outside. That's not an exaggeration. That's closer to reality than most servers would like. Remember those two other habits I mentioned earlier? The vacation time question and the fridge one. We're getting closer to why all three exist for the same underlying reason. Systems that quietly benefit someone in charge tend to survive far longer than they should, dressed up as culture, tradition, or personal choice. Here's the final piece, the one that ties everything else together. Tipping in America isn't really a reward system. It's an inherited workaround for a wage problem nobody wanted to solve directly. One that got normalized so thoroughly that most people never question it. The same way most people never question why they reach for the fridge handle out of pure habit rather than hunger. We'll get to that one too. It's stranger than tipping, honestly, once you see the mechanism behind it. So the next time you're doing tip math in your head, standing there with your phone calculator out, here's the reframe. You're not really rewarding a stranger's kindness. You're quietly patching a hole in the wage system that's been there since long before you were born, one you never agreed to, one nobody ever really asked you to fix. That's the answer to the question I opened with. And it's not the only inherited system running quietly in the background of American life, unquestioned simply because it's always been there, absorbed so early that it feels like common sense instead of what it actually is, a choice someone else made a long time ago. The same is true of vacation time, a choice, not a law of nature that other countries made completely differently. And it's true in a completely different way of a habit that happens in your kitchen almost every single day, one that has nothing to do with hunger and everything to do with a loop running quietly in your brain. You'll never look at a restaurant check the same way again. And once you see how deep this pattern runs, through wages, through workplaces, through your own kitchen, you're going to want to see exactly where else it's hiding.